Imagine two completely different religious worlds just, colliding.
Okay.
Let's say a 17th century Muslim prince on one side and a society of Hindu mystics on the other.
Right, so two very distinct groups.
Exactly. And by all conventional logic, they should just clash,
Yeah.
right? Over their wildly different rules, their distinct rituals, the opposing dogmas.
Oh, absolutely. That's what you'd expect.
But instead, they forged this profound civilization-altering connection.
Really?
Yeah. And how do they do it? Not by sitting down and finding safe, easily defined common ground.
Like they don't just find a compromise.
Nope. They did it by weaponizing the one thing we usually assume drives people apart.
Which is?
Their deepest, darkest, most unutterable secrets.
Oh, wow.
Right. Because when we usually talk about secrets, especially in religion, there's this immediate, almost visceral image that comes to mind.
Yeah, the heavy oak door with the iron hinges.
Exactly. It's the whispered password in a dark alley. It's that exclusive, esoteric mystery cult where you are either on the inside bathed in the light of hidden truth, or you are, on the outside, in the dark.
Right. We inherently think of secrets as walls. They are the ultimate tools of gatekeeping.
But that's what makes this so wild. It goes against everything we're taught about human behavior and sociology.
It really does, because a secret is fundamentally defined, well, at least in our common imagination, by the barrier it creates between the knower and the non-knower.
It's an exclusionary mechanism by design. You build a wall to protect what's yours.
Exactly. But then you step into the world of comparative religious studies, and you look at how different faiths actually interact out there in the messy, real world.
And suddenly that heavy oak door starts to look a lot less like a wall and a lot more like a bridge, which is what we're getting into today. We are exploring this conceptual landscape where the very things we thought were designed to keep outsiders out, the deep, unexplainable mysteries of a faith, are actually the most effective, profound interfaces connecting totally different traditions.
It completely upends our basic assumptions about what a secret is doing when two different worldviews collide. It's this massive counterintuitive paradigm shift.
Because we assume transparency builds trust.
Right.
And secrecy breeds suspicion.
Right. But history shows us something far more complex.
And that complexity is exactly what we are exploring today. We're taking a deep dive into some really fascinating 2026 research by scholars Philip Reichling and Knut Martin Stunkel.
It's a brilliant text.
It really is. It focuses on secrecy as a promoter of contact between religious traditions. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack the hidden mechanics of religious secrecy.
To move past the gatekeeping idea.
Exactly, and discover how the blank spaces created by secrets actually serve as these incredibly dynamic, powerful interfaces for interfaith understanding and translation.
It's a huge topic.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even begin when the very thing we were trying to study is defined by the fact that it's hidden?
Yeah, you're hitting on the exact epistemological nightmare that plagues this entire field of study.
It's a nightmare.
Oh, totally. It's what scholars call the methodological double bind.
Double bind. Okay, how does that work?
Well, if you want to study a secret objectively, to truly understand its internal architecture and how it functions in society, you essentially have to break it apart.
Right, you have to look inside.
You have to expose it to the light of inquiry. But the very moment you do that, the moment you drag it out of the shadows, dissect it, and publish a paper on it,
it's destroyed.
Exactly. It is fundamentally no longer a secret.
Oh, man. It's like trying to study a snowflake by holding it in your warm hand.
That's a perfect analogy.
The act of observation melts the very thing you're trying to observe.
Right. Or, to borrow a metaphor I've heard in these academic circles, if you take the secret house and its inhabitants to pieces just to see how the plumbing works, you ruin the house.
Right. You can't live in it anymore.
Exactly. Which creates this massive anxiety, particularly within the modern scientific worldview.
I can imagine.
Cicella Buck, who is a really prominent ethicist, makes this brilliant observation. She says scientists have developed what she calls a ritualistic denunciation of secrecy.
Ritualistic denunciation. That's intense.
It is. But think about the foundational pillars of the scientific method. What are they?
Free, open, transparent communication. Peer review.
Shared data. Reproducible results. Transparency is the literal oxygen of science.
Right.
Because of that, modern scholars often treat secrecy almost like a rival, sinister religion that they have to actively conjure away or exercise.
Wow.
Yeah, they view a secret purely as a withholding of truth, an obstacle to human progress.
Which is incredibly ironic when you think about
Well, so?
Well, The scholars are treating the concept of the secret with the exact same ritualistic fervor and absolute dogma as the religious adherents who are keeping the secret.
Ah, that's so true.
It's a clash of fundamentalisms. The scientist says everything must be illuminated, and the mystic says some things must remain in the dark.
Right. It's two completely incompatible approaches to truth.
But before we get too deep into how these shadows actually connect people, we need to define our terms. In everyday conversation, we blur a lot of lines, but there is a crucial distinction we need to make here between a mystery and a secret.
Oh, this distinction is absolutely foundational.
Right.
Yeah, we toss those words around interchangeably all the time, but conceptually, they operate on entirely different planes of reality. Jan Assmann, an incredible scholar of Egyptian religion, provides a really clarifying framework here.
Okay, let's hear it.
So, a mystery is something that is fundamentally unfathomable. It's rooted in the very nature of the cosmos, or the divine. It is not hidden because a group of priests decided to lock it in a gold box and throw away the key. It's hidden because the human mind is neurologically, conceptually incapable of fully grasping it.
So, like the origins of time, the experience of death, the absolute essence of a creator.
Exactly. Those are mysteries.
Right. Whereas a secret, which sometimes gets called an arcanum in these historical texts, is something that is just hidden from most people by strategic human action.
Yes.
It's something that could be perfectly known and understood by a human brain, but it is intentionally concealed by a group or an individual.
That's it. And Immanuel Kant gives us a really useful threefold taxonomy to break this down even further, which really helps clarify the stakes here.
Okay, what's Kant's breakdown?
First, Kant says there are secrets of nature, the arcana. These are things like the laws of quantum mechanics, dark matter, or the cure for certain diseases.
Things we just don't know yet.
Right. They're currently hidden from us, but through scientific discovery and time, they might one day become known. The universe is hiding them, but they are discoverable.
Okay, so arcana are puzzles waiting to be solved.
Correct. Second, there are political or strategic secrets, the secreta. These are state secrets, military troop movements, the recipe for Coca-Cola, or your bank password.
The stuff humans actively hide.
Exactly. These are facts deliberately hidden by humans from other humans. If I steal the recipe, I understand the secret completely.
Makes sense.
And third, Kant identifies the holy secret of religion, the mysterium.
Ah, the mystery.
Yes. This is the substantial secret that is forever beyond human capacity to unravel, no matter how much science advances or how many spies you hire.
Okay, let me make sure I'm mapping this correctly. A secret, the arcanum or the secreture, is like a stage magic trick.
Okay, I like that.
If I go to Las Vegas and see a magician make a tiger disappear, I'm amazed. But once I pull back the velvet curtain, go backstage and see the trapdoors and the mirrors, the illusion is totally gone.
The magic is dead.
Right. It's just mechanics. The secret is dead. But a mystery, the mysterium is like the mathematical concept of infinity.
Oh, that's good.
Even if I explain the math to you, even if I write the equation on a chalkboard and you memorize it, it still completely blows your mind. You literally cannot hold the entirety of infinity in your physical brain.
That is a great way to delineate them. The mysterium retains its power even when it's placed right in the center of the fully lit room.
But here is my pushback. This is the exact thing that was tripping me up as I was looking through this research.
What's that?
If a mystery is inherently unknowable to everyone, how can two different religions ever use it to understand each other?
Right.
If a Muslim and a Christian are sitting across from each other and they both have this core mysterium that they literally cannot articulate, aren't they just staring at each other in the dark?
That's a fair point.
How do you build a bridge out of something neither of you can see or describe?
It's the most logical question to ask, and it's the hurdle that has stumped interfaith dialogue for centuries.
Right.
To understand how that bridge is actually built out of the unknowable, we first have to deconstruct how we have traditionally misunderstood the social function of a secret. Okay.
We have to look at why we've always assumed secrets are just walls. And that brings us to the foundational sociology of secrecy. If we want to look at the traditional view, we have to talk about Georg Simmel.
Right, Simmel. If you're studying the sociology of secrecy, Georg Simmel is the godfather of the field.
He really is.
He wrote a cornerstone text back in the early 20th century, and he essentially viewed the secret as a tool of what he called egoistic individualization. It was all about group isolation.
Yeah, Simmel was obsessed with how societies form boundaries. He argued that the primary function of a secret is to form a protective border.
Oh.
He used a very specific German term of Scheidungszweck, which translates roughly to the aim to separate.
The aim to separate.
Right. In Simmel's view, the secret unites the in-group, the people who possess the hidden knowledge, by creating a rigid, impermeable wall against the out-group, the profane masses who don't know.
Right. Us versus them.
Exactly. The shared secret gives the in-group a sense of intense prestige, deep trust, and mutual protection against a hostile outside world. There's a metaphor from researchers Paul Christopher Johnson and Hugh B. Urban that perfectly encapsulates this traditional view.
Oh, the revolving door one.
Yes. They describe secrecy as a revolving door of information that keeps some information and some people in and others out.
It's a great image.
It's just a sorting mechanism. You walk up to the revolving door. If you have the password, it spins you into the lobby. If you don't, it spits you back out onto the street.
Exactly. And if we stop there, Simmel's view makes total pragmatic sense. Secrets divide us. They create factions.
But this newer research proposes a revolutionary pivot in how we look at this.
It really does.
They argue that to understand historical interfaith contact, we have to stop obsessing over the hidden content of the secret. We have to stop trying to pick the lock to see what's inside the vault, and instead we need to look at the form of secrecy as a social practice.
And that pivot changes everything. Think about it. If we accept Kant's premise that the content of the holy secret, the mysterium, is ultimately unknowable anyway, then as scholars, or even just as neighbors trying to understand each other, obsessing over the content is a complete dead end.
Because you can't know it anyway.
Right. You're trying to solve an unsolvable math problem. Instead, you have to look at the act of keeping a secret. Secrecy isn't just a passive absence of information, it's a highly active, dynamic social practice.
How so?
Well, the historian Daniel Jute points out that secrecy actually generates a dynamic market.
A market.
Yeah. When a group claims to have a secret, it doesn't represent a decline of open knowledge. Rather, the very act of hiding something creates a claim to authority.
Oh, I see.
It creates an aura of prestige. It creates a highly emphasized, energized space. By drawing a curtain around something, you are signaling to the entire world what is behind here is incredibly valuable.
Right.
And paradoxically, that energized space becomes a genuine zone of contact. People are drawn to the curtain.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because if we start viewing secrecy as a dynamic economy or a type of currency rather than just a locked vault that we can't open,
Yes.
we can start to see how different religions historically traded, negotiated, and interacted using this very specific currency. It's not about what the secret is, it's about what the secret does when it enters the marketplace of human interaction.
That is the exact mechanism. And when we look at history through this lens, we see a really robust taxonomy of how this plays out.
Like different categories of interaction.
Exactly. We can break down the mechanisms of interfaith contact involving secrets into a few distinct scenarios. But before we look at how different faiths collide over secrets, we should briefly touch on why groups create secrets internally in the first place.
What the research calls endogenous secrets.
Yeah.
Let's explore that, because internally, a religious group usually secretizes something for survival, right?
Right.
They're either trying to protect their members physically, or they are trying to preserve the absolute purity of their spiritual experience from being diluted, co-opted, or mocked by the outside world.
And history gives us incredibly powerful examples of this internal protection. Let's look at taqiyya in Shi'ism.
Okay.
This isn't just a theological concept. It was a gritty life-or-death survival tactic. Taqiyya is the practice of concealing one's faith or dispensing with ordinary religious ordinances when under threat of death or extreme persecution.
Wow.
Yeah. For centuries, minority Shi populations lived under hostile rulers. By creating an endogenous secret, by hiding their true allegiance and rituals, they ensured the physical and communal survival of their faith against an oppressive majority. The secret was a literal shield.
Another incredibly striking example of this comes from the Christian tradition, specifically during the rise of totalitarianism in the 20th century. Think about Germany in the 1930s.
Right.
You have the Nazi regime rising to power, and Nazism functioned very much like a rival religion. It had its own absolute dogmas, its own rituals, its own demand for total devotion.
It was an all-encompassing ideology.
Exactly. So in response to this, the German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who eventually died in a concentration camp for resisting Hitler, called for the church to return to what he called an archendiscipline.
A discipline of the secret.
Yes.
Whoa.
Bonhoeffer looked around and saw the Nazi regime trying to co-opt Christian language,
Right.
trying to merge the church with the state.
Right.
He argued that the Christian church needed to actively hide its most profound mysteries. They needed to stop throwing their deepest sacraments and theology out into the public square because the public square had been poisoned.
That makes total sense.
He wanted to protect the mysterium from being profaned, cheapened, or twisted by the totalitarian ideology of the state. He wasn't hiding the faith because he was embarrassed by it. He was hiding it because it was too precious to be left out in the open where the Nazis could weaponize it.
It's an immune system response. In both the case of Takia and the Arkan discipline, the secret is an internal defense mechanism.
Right.
But the truly groundbreaking part of analyzing secrecy comes when we move from those internal immune responses to exogenous contact.
External context.
Exactly. What happens when two completely different religious traditions, both possessing their own profound, heavily guarded secrets, actually collide in the marketplace?
This is the core of the deep dive.
Yeah, and this research outlines a few historical scenarios that are just fascinating. Let's look at the first one, which we might call mutual secrets.
Okay.
This is where the shared practice of secrecy literally unites diverse groups, leading them to search for a philosophia perennis.
A perennial universal philosophy that they believe underlies all distinct faiths.
Precisely.
This historical example they give completely blew my mind. We're going back to 17th century Germany, specifically to the small Sulzbach court of Count Palatine Christian August.
Such a wild historical moment.
It is. And to understand why this is so radical, you really have to understand the context. This is the 1600s in Europe. They have just gone through the meat grinder of the 30 Years' War.
Oh, yeah.
Which was essentially a continent-wide slaughter driven by rigid, dogmatic, religious differences between Catholics and Protestants. Millions of people died over defined theological boundaries.
The trauma of that era really cannot be overstated. The semiospheres, the atmospheric bubbles of meaning and truth that these different groups breathed were completely toxic to one another.
Completely.
If a Catholic and a Protestant interacted, it was usually, at the end of a pike.
Right, so into this blood-soaked environment steps Christian August. He is incredibly forward-thinking, and he decides to deliberately bring together Catholics, Protestants, and Jews at his court in Sulzbach.
He even sets up a printing press to publish their combined works.
Yeah, but he didn't just invite them to sit around a table and debate their dogmas. He knew that would just lead to another war. Instead, he brought them together to study the deeply secret, esoteric knowledge of the Jewish Kabbalah, alongside other occult philosophies.
This is the absolute genius of the move. He didn't ask them to compromise on their bright, clearly defined daytime dogmas. He invited them into the shadows.
Wow, yeah.
He used the shared pursuit of deep, complex, inherently hidden secrets as the foundation to foster a utopian ecumenical community. They were united by the fact that they were all seekers of the hidden truth.
So they bonded over what they didn't fully grasp yet.
Yes, the Christian scholars believed that hidden within the Jewish Kabbalah were the secret, uncorrupted truths of early Christianity, and the Jewish scholars were eager to share and elevate their mystical texts.
It's a beautiful example of the secret as a bridge. Because the content of the secret was so obscure, so difficult to grasp, and required intense collaborative study across different languages like Hebrew, Aramaic, Latin, the actual process of seeking the secret forced them into cooperative contact.
Yes, the process itself is what united them.
They had to rely on each other to decode the mystery. They built a micro-society of religious tolerance based entirely on the premise that none of them had the full, transparent truth.
It's incredibly moving. But, unfortunately, history isn't always a utopian court in Sulzbach.
Right.
More often than not, religions don't want to hold hands and seek a shared perennial philosophy. They want to win.
Yeah, human nature.
And that brings us to the second scenario of exogenous contact. One secret, one explanation.
The battle for supremacy.
Exactly. This is what happens when religions compete in a shared marketplace. And instead of merging or cooperating, one tradition aggressively tries to explain away the other tradition's secret.
This is basically intellectual colonization.
Right.
You aren't killing the other group, you're just claiming that their deepest mystery is actually just a footnote in your theology. We see this vividly in the early centuries of the Christian church, when Christianity was trying to establish dominance in the Roman Empire.
Right, because at the time, The Roman world was full of these incredibly popular, highly secretive mystery cults, like the cult of Mithras.
Yeah, the cult of Mithras was a massive rival to early Christianity. They had secret initiation rites, they had sacred communal meals involving bread and wine, they had themes of salvation and rebirth.
To an outside observer, they look uncomfortably similar to Christian sacraments.
Very similar.
Mm.
So how did the early Christian writers handle this? You have a figure like Justin Martyr looking at the Mithraic mysteries. He doesn't say, oh, wow, look at this. We share a similar mystery. Let's achieve concrescence.
No, definitely not.
No, Justin Martyr goes on the offensive. He claims that the secrets of Mithras are actually demonic imitations.
Demonic imitations.
Yeah. He argued that demons had foreseen the coming of Christ, and they planted these fake copycat mysteries in the Roman world to confuse people and steal souls.
It's a ruthless rhetorical strategy.
It really is.
Or you have writers like Lactantius, who looked at the ancient, highly revered secrets of Hermes Trismegistos, which were foundational to a lot of Hellenistic philosophy and mysticism.
Right.
Lactantius argued that those ancient secrets weren't demonic, but they were just a flawed preliminary overture. He claimed they were just breadcrumbs leading up to the true and final revelation of Jesus Christ.
So they are dissolving the rival secret by claiming to have the ultimate decoder ring.
Precisely.
Justin Martyr and Lactantius are looking at the pagans and saying, we know what your secret actually means better than you do. It's a way of asserting total dominance over the rival's meaning-making world without ever having to engage with it on its own terms.
And while that's an aggressive strategy, there is a third scenario of interfaith contact that might be the most fascinating of all.
Oh, this was my favorite.
Yeah, this is when the contact between a religion and a surrounding culture actually forces the religion to generate a new secret just to survive.
I found this part of the research so compelling, it totally flips the script.
It does.
Because usually we think of religions slowly abandoning their superstitions and secrets as they become more modern and rational, right?
That's the secularization theory, yes.
But the research points out that sometimes when a religious tradition is enveloped by a highly rational, secular, or philosophical culture, it has to invent or heavily emphasize a secret to avoid being completely assimilated.
And if you look at early 20th century liberal Judaism, you see this exact survival mechanism playing out brilliantly.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So you had brilliant rabbis and thinkers like Leo Baeck and Max Weiner, and they were operating in the long wake of the Haskalah, which was the Jewish Enlightenment.
Right.
For decades, the Haskalah had heavily emphasized reason, universal ethics, and rational philosophy. The goal had been to show that Judaism was perfectly compatible with modern, enlightened European thought.
But thinkers like Leo Baeck looked around and realized they had a massive problem. The danger was that Judaism was becoming too explainable.
Too rational.
Exactly. If you strip away all the mystery, all the paradox, and you reduce a thousands of years old faith only to a set of good ethical postulates like be kind to your neighbor and pursue justice, then it just dissolves into generic, secular ethical philosophy.
Right. Why be Jewish if it's the exact same thing as being a secular humanist?
Exactly. It loses the very ground that supports it.
So, to counter this hyper-rationality, Baeck and others executed a brilliant philosophical pivot. They aggressively re-emphasized the secret and the inherent unresolvable paradox of Judaism.
You leaned into the mystery.
They argued that true religion must contain a core that defies human logic. They weaponized the mystery as a survival mechanism.
Wow.
By asserting that there is a profound, irrational secret at the heart of the faith, they built a fortress that secular rationality couldn't penetrate. They saved the distinct identity of the religion by plunging its core back into the dark.
Okay, so let's synthesize where we are.
Yeah.
We have seen secrets act as literal shields for physical survival, like Takia. We've seen them act as shared utopian projects in Sulzbach. We've seen them used as battlegrounds for intellectual supremacy by early Christians, and we've seen them utilized as life rafts against the rising tide of secularization in liberal Judaism.
It's a very dynamic tool.
It is. But I keep coming back to the listener. If you are listening to this deep dive, and you are sitting in a room with someone of a totally different faith, say you are a Christian and they are a Buddhist, or you are a Muslim and they are a secular humanist, logically it sounds like avoiding the deep, unexplainable mysteries of your respective worldviews would prevent a real connection.
Which is what we're always taught.
Right. We are taught to find common ground. We are taught to find the things we can clearly define and agree on. How on earth do we connect over something neither of us can articulate?
What's fascinating here is that the research argues the exact opposite of our standard intuition.
Okay.
The inability to articulate the secret is not a bug in the system of human communication. It is the ultimate feature.
A feature, not a bug.
Yes. The fact that the secret is conceptually empty of defined, rigid, exclusionary dogma is exactly what makes it the perfect interface. And this brings us to the conceptual core of this entire framework, the theory of the secret as a blank space.
The blank space. The German word used in the research is Leerstelle.
Right.
And what's wild is that the authors borrow this concept not from theology, but from a literary theorist named Wolfgang Iser. Now, Iser wasn't writing about religion at all. He was writing about how human beings read books.
Right, literary theory.
And Iser argued that in any piece of literature, there are blank spaces, things the author deliberately leaves unsaid, undetermined gaps in the narrative.
Think about reading a novel. The author doesn't describe every single leaf on a tree or every single microscopic facial expression of a character. They leave gaps. And Iser pointed out that these blank spaces aren't just empty voids where the author got lazy. They are an active, highly charged matrix. They are the elementary conditions of communication because they force the reader to use their own imagination, their own memories, their own life experience to connect the dots.
The blank space invites the reader into the text to co-create the meaning.
Exactly.
If the author explains every single detail, the reader is just a passive observer. But if there is a blank space, the reader has to step up and participate.
Precisely. And the absolute genius of Reichling and Strunkel's work is taking Iser's literary theory and applying it directly to religious secrecy.
It's a huge conceptual leap.
It is. They argue that a religious secret acts as a linguistic and conceptual blank space. It is an empty frame. By loudly declaring this is our deepest unutterable secret, a religion is conspicuously indicating that something is absent from everyday language and understanding. But because that frame is technically empty of rigid, easily debated dogma, it actually invites the other tradition to step up, look at the frame, and relate to it using their own vocabulary.
To help us visualize this, because it's a heavy concept, the research uses a brilliant analogy from art history, the hetomasia, or the empty throne.
Oh, this is such a good visual.
Right. If you look at religious and political art across vastly different cultures throughout history, you see this recurring motif of an unoccupied seat of power.
It's everywhere once you know to look for it. Let's look at Buddhist art. You might see an intricately carved, beautiful throne with absolutely no one sitting on it, perhaps just a set of footprints resting on the footstool.
Right.
In that specific cultural context, the empty throne symbolizes the Buddha's enlightenment, his absolute transcending of the physical form into nirvana.
But then if you travel across the world and look at Roman art from a similar period, you see another empty throne. Maybe this one is draped with a specific purple cloth or has a diadem resting on it. In the Roman context, that empty throne symbolizes the invisible, omnipresent, unchallengeable power of the emperor.
And if you move forward in time and look at early Christian Byzantine art, you see the exact same visual. An empty throne, perhaps with a cross or a book of Gospels resting on the cushion.
And what does it mean there?
In Christian theology, this symbolizes the parousia, the intense, apocalyptic anticipation of Christ's return to judge the living and the dead.
So it is the exact same visual symbol, an empty chair.
Right.
But because the throne is empty, because the central defining figure is missing, because it is a literal blank space, it acts as a universal interface. Different faiths, different empires, different worldviews can look at the exact same image, the exact same blank space, and translate it perfectly into their own spiritual or political vocabulary without violating the image itself.
Mark Taewen, a scholar cited in the research who studies Japanese religion, has a wonderful way of describing this dynamic. He calls the secret a vacuum displayed in a conspicuous place.
A vacuum?
Yeah. And because nature and human psychology abhors a vacuum, this conspicuously placed blank space has what he calls a black hole potency.
A black hole potency.
It irresistibly attracts people, theories, and interpretations from all sides. It pulls you in because you naturally, desperately want to fill the void with meaning.
I was trying to think of an everyday analogy for this, something that clicks instantly, and it hit me. It's exactly like a blank tile in a game of Scrabble.
Oh, I love that. Let's break that down.
Think about how Scrabble works. Every other letter in the bag has a rigidly defined value and identity. An A is an A, a Q is a Q. They are dogmatic.
Right.
They can only be played in specific, limited ways. If I have a Z and you have an X, and we are trying to build a word together, we are probably going to clash. The linguistic structures are too rigid, too incompatible.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The rigid letters are the defined dogmas of a religion. The dietary laws, the historical claims, the specific rituals.
Exactly. But the blank tile has no inherent letter printed on it. It has no strict identity. And because it is completely empty, because it is a Lear stele, it can be whatever letter the player needs it to be to connect their word to the rest of the board.
It adapts.
The blank tile is the ultimate interface. The secret, the mystery, is the blank tile of interface dialogue. It allows two entirely different words, two entirely different worldviews to intersect on the board.
And this leads us to the most profound realization of this entire framework. What happens when two different religious traditions essentially play their blank tiles at the exact same time?
Right.
We get a dynamic process of coming together, of shared meaning-making that doesn't erase the distinctiveness of either tradition.
Which brings us to the final major concept of the research, and it's a word we really need to unpack carefully. Concrescence.
Yep.
The authors specifically and firmly warn us against using the word hybridization when we talk about this kind of interfaith contact.
Yes, they do.
Why is hybridization a dirty word in this context?
Because hybridization implies mashing two distinct things together into a diluted soup. It implies a compromise where both sides lose a bit of their unique historical identity to form a new, generic, watered-down middle ground.
And religions hate that.
Religious traditions generally hate that idea, yes. They don't want to be diluted. They believe their revelation is true. So the authors borrow a term from the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead. Concrescence.
Concrescence.
Yes. It translates literally to growing together. Whitehead defined it as the production of novel togetherness.
Novel togetherness.
It's like two distinct vines growing up the same trellis. The distinct religions remain entirely distinct. They keep their own leaves, their own roots, their own rigid Scrabble letters, but they grow together by connecting at the interface of their shared blank spaces.
They touch without merging.
They create a new field of mutual understanding without destroying their original borders.
Okay, let's look at how this concrescence actually works in the real world, because the research gives us two mind-blowing historical case studies where we can see the blank tile being played.
Okay, let's do it.
The first is the story of Muhammad Darashikas in the 17th century.
Yes. This is one of the most remarkable and ultimately tragic figures in religious history. Darashikas was a devout Muslim prince, the favored son of the Mughal emperor Shah Jahan, the man who built the Taj Mahal.
Right.
He was the heir apparent to an empire in India where Orthodox Islam and deeply rooted Hinduism were living side by side, often in deep tension. His younger brother, Aurangzeb, was a strict, orthodox conservative who believed the two faiths must remain entirely separate.
But Darashik believes something different.
Very different. He didn't try to force the two religions to hybridize into a generic soup. Instead, he looked for the blank spaces.
He did something incredibly ambitious and dangerous. He gathered Hindu scholars and mystics, and he translated 50 of the Hindu Upanishads, their most deeply philosophical, mystical, esoteric text, from Sanskrit into Persian, which was the language of the Muslim court.
A massive undertaking.
And he called his translation Sur-e-Akbar, which translates to the Great Secret.
And his method of translation is exactly what we've been talking about today. He didn't try to align the rigid dogmas. He didn't try to argue that the Hindu gods were the same as Islamic prophets.
Right.
He used the secret spiritual meaning as his interface. He played the blank tile. In his introduction to the translation, Darashiku argued that the Upanishads were, in fact, the hidden secret book that is mysteriously referred to within the Quran itself.
Let's just pause and appreciate the sheer intellectual audacity of that move.
It's staggering.
He literally took the deep, unutterable secret of Hinduism, the mystical concept of Advaita Vedanta, the ultimate oneness of reality, and mapped it directly onto the unutterable, hidden references within Orthodox Islam, the concept of Tawhid, the absolute oneness of God.
Yes.
He used the secret as the bridge. By doing so, he allowed these two massive semiospheres to achieve concrescence. They could remain distinct. A Muslim remained a Muslim, a Hindu remained a Hindu, but they now had a shared interface, a shared blank space, where they could actually converse about the ultimate hidden nature of reality.
He proved that the mystery wasn't a wall, it was a door.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, history is brutal. His Orthodox brother Aurangzeb defeated him in a war of succession, had Darashikas executed for heresy, and instituted a deeply intolerant regime.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. But Darashika's intellectual achievement, his translation, survived and had a massive impact on how Eastern philosophy was eventually understood in the West.
And that leads us to the research's culminating example of this process. It is perhaps one of the most famous encounters in Western religious history, and it perfectly illustrates playing the blank Scrabble tile. The Apostle Paul at the Areopagus in Athens, as recorded in the book of Acts, chapter 17.
This is an absolute masterclass in reading the sociology of secrecy. To set the scene, Paul is a devout Jewish Christian, steeped in the Hebrew scriptures and the new revelation of Christ. He walks into Athens.
Yeah.
Now, Athens at this time is the intellectual, philosophical, and religious center of the Hellenistic world. It is crawling with Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. It is a city that loves to debate, but it is also a city steeped in anxiety.
Right.
They are absolutely covered in idols and temples to 1,000 different, strictly defined Greek gods. Zeus, Athena, Hermes, every god has a specific domain, a specific rigid letter in their alphabet.
And Paul is deeply distressed by this. He looks around, and from his perspective, it's a city drowning in idolatry. Now, if Paul had just walked into the marketplace and started arguing dogma, if he had just started slamming his rigid letters down on the board, saying, "Your use is a fake, my God is the only real God, let me explain the theology of the cross,"
He would have hit a brick wall. The Athenian philosophers would have just dismissed him as a babbler. The semiospheres were too incompatible.
But Paul is brilliant. He surveys the city, and he looks past all the rigid dogmas. He looks for a gap, and he finds a literal, physical blank space in the Greek religious framework. He finds an altar with a very specific, curious inscription.
To the unknown God.
To the unknown God. It's the ultimate heteroimagia, the ultimate empty throne. The Greeks, in their deep anxiety to cover all their bases and not accidentally offend some powerful deity they might have missed in their massive pantheon, had built an altar to a god they explicitly admitted they knew absolutely nothing about.
It was a monument to a secret.
Yes, it was an empty frame. It was a vacuum displayed in a conspicuous place.
And Paul seizes on this black hole potency. He stands up at the Areopagus, the high court of Athens, and he uses this exact blank space as his interface. He says, "For as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God, whom therefore ye ignorantly worship, him declare I unto you."
He plays the blank tile. He doesn't aggressively destroy the Greek framework. He utilizes its own acknowledged gap. He essentially says, that blank space you've left open, that mystery you admit you can't articulate, I have the vocabulary for that. He takes the secret of the Christian gospel, the mystery of Christ, which was entirely foreign and nonsensical to Greek philosophy, and he translates it directly into the blank space provided by the Athenian altar. He achieves concrescence by connecting his unutterable truth to their acknowledged mystery.
It's a flawless execution of what we've been discussing. He doesn't hybridize Christianity with worship of Zeus. He finds the boundary where Greek rationality fails, where they admit a secret exists, and he builds this bridge right there.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, to what this all means for you, the listener, because it completely changes how we might approach conversations with people who hold fundamentally different worldviews.
Oh, absolutely.
In modern interfaith dialogue, or even just in everyday political or social discourse, we spend almost all our energy trying to find common ground in the bright light of day. We compare our rules, our ethical codes, our historical facts. We try to find the things we can clearly articulate and agree upon. We keep trying to match up our rigid Scrabble letters.
And while establishing basic ethical common ground is important for a functioning society, this research suggests that true, profound connection, the kind that builds lasting bridges between entirely different meaning-making worlds, often happens not in the bright light of defined dogma, but in the shared shadows of the ineffable.
It happens in the blank spaces.
Exactly. Acknowledging that we both have mysteries we cannot explain, that we both possess secrets that defy our own language, actually provides the strongest possible bond.
Wow.
The shared experience of awe before the unknown is a more universal language than any specific theology. When the Muslim prince and the Hindu mystic, or the Christian apostle and the Greek philosopher admit that the universe contains a mysterium they cannot fully master, they suddenly have a place to stand together.
It's a profound realization. We started this deep dive by looking at secrets as annoying obstacles. We saw them as the enemies of science and transparency, as Cicely Bach pointed out with her concept of ritualistic denunciation. We saw them as typical tools for social exclusion and egoistic isolation, as George Simmel argued. The heavy oak doors built to keep the profane masses out.
But by diving deep into the actual history of religious contact, from the eclectic scholars at the 17th century Sulzbach court finding a perennial philosophy, to Dara Shikoh translating the Upanishads as the great secret, to Paul preaching in the shadow of the Parthenon.
We discovered that those oak doors operate much more like a revolving door. And even more profoundly, they operate as dynamic currencies. They are the blank Scrabble tiles.
They're the empty thrones.
Empty thrones that have historically allowed totally different traditions to translate their deepest truths to one another without losing their own souls in the process.
It requires a massive shift in perspective. It requires humility and an acceptance that the most important parts of our identity, the core of our worldview, might be the parts we have the least vocabulary for.
Yeah.
And that isn't a weakness. It's the very thing that allows us to connect with the other.
So the next time you encounter someone from a totally different background, a different faith, or a wildly different worldview, maybe don't start the conversation by demanding they explain everything perfectly. Don't start by comparing your rigid letters and arguing over who has the better alphabet.
Definitely not.
Maybe ask them what they can't explain. Look for their blank spaces. Look for their altars to the unknown. And offer up your own mysteries in return. You might find that the very things you thought were walls are actually the only bridges that can reach across the divide.
It's a transformative way to view human communication.
We leave you with this final, provocative thought to mull over. We live in an age, the digital age, the information age, that aggressively demands total transparency.
We do.
We expect every institution, every tradition, and every individual to be fully laid bare, totally categorized, and explained in simple, bite-sized, rational terms. We want all the lights turned on all the time.
Transparency is our modern dogma.
But if this research is right, if secrets, mysteries, and the unexplainable are the very blank spaces that allow human beings to connect across vast cultural and spiritual divides, what happens to our ability to truly understand each other when we successfully eradicate all the secrets?
If we light up every shadow, we might find we have lost the very canvas on which we draw our connections.
Something to think about.
Huh?
Until next time.